By every conventional measure of military engineering in 1938, Geoffrey de Havilland's proposal bordered on absurdity. A bomber constructed almost entirely of wood, carrying no defensive armament, and relying solely on speed for survival. Such a notion defied the established logic of modern warfare. The Air Ministry's response was predictable: polite rejection. Metal, they insisted, was the future, would belong to the Great War, suitable for biplanes and training aircraft, not for an air force preparing to face the mechanized might of the Third Reich. Yet de Havilland persisted. And within that persistence lay the seed of one of the most elegant and effective aircraft of the Second World War, and the stage for an unlikely hero who would make it faster still. In the late 1930s, Britain faced a grim arithmetic problem. Rearmament was accelerating, yet aluminum was scarce, rationed, contested by every branch of the military, struggling to secure enough for fighters and bombers. De Havilland's genius was to recognize opportunity where others saw limitation. His company had spent decades perfecting laminated wood construction, bonding birch plywood with Ecuadorian balsa and Canadian spruce using casing glues originally developed for furniture. The result was a structure that was light, strong, and crucially, manufacturable by peacetime craftsmen, furniture makers, piano builders, and skilled woodworkers excluded from metal airframe production. The Mosquito would thus become a war machine built by civilian artisans, a bomber that did not divert precious resources from Spitfire and Hurricane production. The design that emerged in 1939 was nothing short of audacious. 2. Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same power plants that propelled Britain's finest fighters, mounted on a sleek all-wood airframe with a wingspan of 16.5 meters. There were no gun turrets, no bomb aimers. Compartment, only a pilot and navigator in a narrow cockpit, wagering their survival on speed and mathematics. The performance estimates bordered on revolutionary, a top speed exceeding 400 miles per hour at altitude, faster than any fighter then in service. Speed would be its armor, velocity, its weapon. On the 25th of November 1940, the first prototype, painted a bright training yellow, lifted off from Hatfield Aerodrome. Test pilot Geoffrey de Havilland Jr. advanced the throttles, and the Mosquito responded with unexpected eagerness. By February 1941, official trials at Boscombe Down confirmed the astonishing results: 392 miles per hour at 22,000 feet, even with test equipment aboard and unoptimized engines. The Air Ministry's skepticism began to erode. But speed on paper and speed in combat are very different things. The early production Mosquitoes were fitted with Mosquito's Merlin XX engines, each rated for strict boost limits, 14 pounds per square inch for takeoff and less for sustained flight. These limits were not arbitrary. Rolls-Royce engineers had carefully calculated them to prevent catastrophic failure. Exceeding the threshold risked detonation, shattered connecting rods, melted pistons, engines destroying themselves over occupied Europe. The manuals were explicit, and the limits were sacred. Yet by late 1942, as Mosquitoes began flying deep penetration raids into Germany, troubling reports emerged. The aircraft were fast, yes, but no longer untouchable. The Luftwaffe's Focke-Wulf to 1 Onchies and the latest Messerschmitt Bf 109 Grem variants were closing the gap. Interceptions were becoming more frequent. Pilots returned with tales of tracer fire passing uncomfortably close, of desperate dives that barely opened the distance, of engines screaming at emergency power that still wasn't quite enough. De Havilland's vision had been vindicated, but now the aircraft needed something more, something the design office had never planned for, and the manual strictly forbade. It needed someone willing to read between the lines of engineering tolerances, to see not limits, but possibilities. That someone was Roderick Banks. Banks was not an engineer. He was a fitter, a rank the Royal Air Force took pains to distinguish from its design staff. In 1942, his workshop at RAF Marham in Norfolk was one of dozens across Bomber Command, maintaining the Merlin engines that powered Lanchesters, Halifaxes, and the growing Mosquito fleet. His job was routine: disassemble, inspect, replace, reassemble, record, and return to service. The system relied on precision and compliance, men like Banks following the book to the letter. Except Banks had a peculiar habit: he read everything. Not just the maintenance manuals, but the Banks had a peculiar habit. He read everything. Not just the maintenance manuals, but the engineering reports, test memos, and even correspondence between Rolls-Royce engineers. His curiosity was quiet, methodical. He wasn't trying to defy orders, he simply wanted to understand why the rules existed. It was this curiosity that led him to notice something unusual. Deep within a Merlin performance bulletin, a footnote mentioned that under controlled conditions, the engine could sustain a higher boost, up to 18 pounds per square inch, for short bursts, provided that mixture richness and coolant flow were adjusted accordingly. The note was intended for factory engineers, not field fitters, but Banks saw in it a possibility, a way to reclaim the Mosquito's lost advantage. He began experimenting, cautiously at first. In test stands, he adjusted the manifold pressure regulators, recalibrating the boost control units to allow marginally higher pressures. He monitored the engines meticulously, temperatures, vibrations, detonation, knock, all the signs that signaled mechanical distress. The engines held. They ran hotter, yes, but not dangerously so. Banks realized that the Merlin was a stronger engine than its paperwork suggested. Word spread quietly among the maintenance crews. A handful of Mosquitoes returning from service flights reported higher top speeds, improved climb rates. When the pilots were questioned, they simply shrugged and credited good tailwinds, but those in the know understood the tailwind was mechanical. By early in 943, Banks's adjustments had become an open secret at RAF Marham. Crews preparing for deep strikes into Germany, Berlin, Hamburg, and the Ruhr would request Banks tuned engines. With the modified boost settings, the Mosquito could sustain speeds over 420 miles per hour at altitude enough to outpace even the latest interceptors. Of course, the modifications were technically unauthorized roles. Royce engineers would have called them reckless, the Air Ministry, insubordinate. But in war, necessity often rewrites the rulebook. For the men flying low over enemy territory, speed was life, and Banks's quiet defiance saved lives by the dozen. In time, official recognition followed, albeit indirectly, later variants of the Merlin and Dumb Merlin. Most notably, the Merlin 72 and 76 were certified for the higher boost pressures Banks had already proved possible in the field. The Mosquito became not just a bomber, but a multi-role marvel: pathfinder, reconnaissance platform, night fighter, and precision raider. It struck at Gestapo headquarters, intercepted enemy bombers, and photographed Berlin in daylight. By War's end, the aircraft once dismissed as a wooden folly had earned its place among the legends of aviation. Over 7,700 were built. Its wooden frame confounded enemy radar, its speed embarrassed jet age opponents, and its craftsmanship stood as a testament to Britain's ingenuity under pressure. And behind its legend, somewhere between the blueprints and the battlefield, stood men like Roderick Banks, unofficial engineers of victory, who understood that sometimes to keep an idea flying, one must be willing to bend the rules that built it.